Hi guys, just wanted to check that my audio and video is coming through okay. Thanks, Bridget.
A CH3 group and computer.
So we'll get started in about 2 to 3 minutes, guys. Just let any people that are running a bit late filter in. While we're waiting, just want to double check. Can everybody see the slides that I'm sharing? Awesome, thank you.
Now on his way to the United States, where he'll unveil details of Australia's new deal on nuclear-powered submarines.
A final farewell. At the end of
Guys, can we just double check that we're all muted?
think that how it could possibly be more open, more generous, more welcoming. Prime Minister Narendra Modi rolling out the red carpet of one
We'll start in about 2 minutes, guys. All right, guys, I think we'll get started then. So thank you all for turning up today on a Saturday night. I'm not sure whether you had plans or not, but thanks for making the effort to get here. So essentially this webinar will be kind of covering, the title of this is what I did on the day of my Gamsat, and I'll be taking you through a little bit of what my own journey was and how I went about it. But primarily alongside that, what it's there to do is hopefully talk through with you guys what the next week or two will look like, what you should be doing during the period, the night before, the day off, and some general principles we can kind of go through. I'm just going to flag this ahead of time. This is not the webinar for how do I write an essay or how do I deal with a technical text in section 1, and I don't think I know enough about section 3 to make an intelligent comment. But as we go along, please throw in any, I don't think there's a Q&A in here, but any questions that you have, please chuck it in the chat box. Have it turned on for everybody unless it's something private, just that way when I'm answering your message, people know which question I'm answering. And we'll leave plenty of space at the end for some Q&A. So as I said, I'll briefly give you a run-up of who I am. We'll be going through kind of what the next week to night before today looks like, key takeaways. I'm going to try and leave as much time at the end for Q&A. That way, any questions that you have, no matter how silly or trivial it may seem, please go ahead and ask them. If I can't answer them immediately, I'll at least point you towards somewhere which might have the answers. So with that said, who am I? My name is Maninda. That's my face there. You can see this isn't identity theft. And essentially, I'm currently a third-year medical student in the University of Queensland. I've just started my clinical placements, which have been very exciting. Did my undergrad at the University of Sydney, did a Bachelor of Medical Science, did an honours year as well. And then was fortunate enough, after sitting the Gamsat twice, I did the September setting and then the infamous June 2020. For those of you who may not be familiar with that, that was when COVID first hit Australia, and ASA decided to postpone the March sitting and move it to June instead. And that influenced my study a little bit as well, which I'll go into. But fortunate enough to get an interview after those two, and then entered UQ Med in 2021. Since then, I'm a Section 1 tutor at Fraser's Gamsat, and also am lucky enough to be able to co-manage it with my lovely co-manager, Meghna, who some of you may or may not have come across or heard about. So enough about me. Now, in terms of where we're sitting at the moment, I believe it's about March 11th. So we have just under a week, under 2 weeks, 2 weeks, or just a little bit over, depending on when your particular exam date for the Gamsat is. Now, I think one of the most important things to keep in mind in this stage is you're nearly at the finish line. Now, if you've been doing your study and you've been preparing, it's going to feel like you just can't push any further. You're sick of it. You want it to end. You can't be bothered anymore, and you're just about done with it. And the good thing is you are so close, and you really only have to push for just a little bit further, and then you'll be done. But the most important thing during this phase is you having a plan. In other words, it doesn't matter what that plan looks like. If you have a study plan that you've been following up until this point, the key thing is to stick with it. Don't kind of throw your arms up and be like, I'm done with it. I can't do any more study. Do a little bit, because this point of every little bit helps is very true. I don't care if it's even like 10 minutes a day, just to look at one thing. The idea is whenever you look at those kind of curves that pop up in the Gamsat, right? It's a very steep S shape where kind of you have the lower percentiles at one end, upper percentiles at the end, and then you have that middle bit. And you can go very fast up and down the curve on the turn of a few marks, right? So even if it seems like something trivial, even if it's just writing an essay plan, not even the full-blown essay, every little bit helps. And you need to have a plan and continue right through to the end in terms of sticking to it and executing it. If you've been studying 1 hour a day, every day for the past few months, that's the same thing you need to maintain. You don't need to necessarily switch it up or change it if you don't want to. At least have that baseline. But in these last kind of 2 weeks, if you're curious about, okay, how can I eke that little bit extra to get me over the top on exam day? What do I need to do to maximize my gains or like help myself as much as possible? There are two strategies. One is about maximizing your strengths, and the second is about shoring up your weaknesses in a smart way, right? That's why I've said low-hanging fruit. So to elaborate a little bit on that, right? For me personally, leading up into the Gamsat, I knew my personal strengths was section 1 and 2. Section 3 was not my strongest suit, right? I knew I was going to have to focus a little bit more, hope a little bit more my section 1 and 2 than my section 3. What that meant, therefore, was that as I approached this stage, as I got closer to exam day, I dedicated my time to making sure that I stayed up to date with my section 1 and 2 stuff, right? I pushed myself in section 1 and 2 with harder content, writing harder essays, trying to raise my ceiling, right? The idea of a ceiling and a floor, which you might hear, is the ceiling is the maximum possible mark you're going to get on your best possible day, right? If everything goes well, all the dots line up, all the stars align, what's the highest mark you can get? The idea of focusing on your strengths is to maximize that ceiling. The other half of it is raising your floor. Raising your floor is the idea of having a baseline, right? Almost insurance. It doesn't matter what goes wrong, at a minimum, I'm going to achieve this mark. And the idea that we want to approach in our preparation is we want to raise our ceiling and our floor. But even more so than maximizing our strengths, the major thing is shoring up our key weaknesses. Now, what this means as far as your preparation goes is you need to focus on specific targeted elements that will give you the greatest bang for your buck. So for example, in my case, section 3 was a weak point, right? Now, there is a lot of things I could have done differently in terms of, or not differently, a lot of things I could have worked on in these 2 weeks in terms of section 3, right? There are like a lot of things. Did I want to work on the maths? Did I want to work on particular problem types? Did I want to work on a particular subject? So like the bio versus the chem, something like that. What I realized though, was I needed to pick 1 or 2 things that were going to make the biggest difference to me on exam day. So for example, something like improving some of my basic maths, like my log manipulation, or focusing on some of the key topics like in chem, like how are things presented with molecules? How do we rearrange them? Those kind of things. I picked one or two things which seemed to be a real weakness of mine, and that if I could improve, that would definitely increase the chances of me getting a couple of extra marks here and there. And remember, again, as far as the Gamsat is concerned, sometimes a couple of extra marks is what you need. It's not about these gigantic 20, 30% improvements. Sometimes a few marks here and there all add up to a very large improvement. So to summarize there, we don't want to neglect our strengths. We want to double down a little bit on them, but also we want to pick one or two key areas and focus on improving them, right? The trap you don't want to fall into, and it's a difficult one not to, because we all tend to get worried and we're uncertain and we want to do everything that we possibly can, is to spread ourselves too thin, right? The bad thing to do in that situation would have been, for me, for example, to be like, crap, there's all these different section 3 things I'm going to do. I'm going to try and work on all of them. And by doing that, I wouldn't have really spent any particular time on any one of those individual skills, right? I would have kind of learned all of them kind of in a half-assed way and not really gotten any better at any particular one, rather than accepting the fact that, hey, you know what? I have a limited period of time. I'm not going to be able to get everything that I want done. What I am going to do is pick one or two things, make sure I smash them out. And that way, if they come up in the exam, I'm solid for those. So that's kind of, in these weeks leading up, what we need to be doing, checking in, making sure we're not neglecting our strengths or our weaknesses. Now, obviously, my weakness was in section 3. This applies to section 1 and section 2 as well, right? If you're somebody that's struggling in section 1, right? Let's say you really, like, you're okay at everything, but let's say you're really bad at poetry or something like that, right? Or you're kind of bad at a few things, but you're really bad at poetry. The key there is pick that thing that you're really bad at and try and nail that, right? That way, if you get something that's a poem that comes up, it doesn't matter if, say, the poetry question has 4 questions and you're not getting all 4 of them correct. The goal is you take it from 0 to anything else, right? So even if you can get an extra mark or an extra 2 marks on that poetry question, where you previously would have definitely got a 0, that's a huge bonus you can get. Alternatively, if you take 1 or 2 of those areas that you're moderately weak in and you choose to improve those, but the key thing is pick small, manageable goals or weaknesses that you know you can get a definite return on and work on them. Don't feel pressure, don't feel like you need to shore everything up, because A, that's never going to happen for anybody, even the people that feel prepared. And B, it's just going to end up with you kind of dabbling your fingers in a little bit of everything and not actually getting anywhere. Now, with that said, we've gone through the next 2 weeks or so. We come to the day before the exam, right? Now, I've made this point here about choosing maintenance or disengagement. Now, what I mean by that is everybody is different, right? And I don't mean that in a facetious, like, of course, everybody's different. One of the most common questions that comes up as a tutor or somebody that's kind of helping people out with Gamsat is, should I do questions before the exam? Should I do questions on the day of the exam? What's the best strategy to do, right? And the kind of answer that initially seems like a cop-out is you need to do what's best for you. Now, what does that actually mean, and why is that not a cop-out? At the end of the day, with the Gamsat, this is as much a mental test as it is a skills-based test, right? Now, the key thing is, over these last couple of months, you've been honing your skills. You've been developing your skills. Your skills are locked in, right? At this stage, the night before, it's not like you're suddenly going to forget how to do something, right? Like, that's locked into your muscle memory. The key thing that you now need to focus on in this lead up, and especially the day before, is what does my mindset look like, right? There are plenty of stories I know of people who have been really well prepared, doing really well, look like they'll probably smash the exam. And because they had a bad day on the exam or their mental state wasn't quite right, they suffered for it, right? So don't neglect the idea of being like, look after your mental side, make sure your mental side's in check, is not kind of a frivolous or throwaway line. It is actually very important and does translate directly to the kind of results that you're going to see on exam day, right? So when we get to this idea of what do I mean by maintenance or disengage and it being a personal choice, I'll give you an example as far as I'm concerned. Now, for me, my personality is such that I will feel naturally anxious if I have a big exam coming up and I don't do any preparation for it right before it, right? It's not so much that I'm expecting in the day before to crack some like miracle code and suddenly like bump up my mark by like 15% or something like that. It's just the way my brain is wired and the way I am as a person. I feel like if I don't see that content, if I don't go through it in some way, shape, or form, I'm like, even though it's irrational, mentally, I'm going to feel slightly less prepared. So the key takeaway there is for my mental comfort the day before the exam, I'd flick through a couple of papers, do an essay plan or two, not necessarily papers, questions or stems, do an essay plan or two, just to feel like I was still in it, right? There are other people I know who that is the worst possible thing that they could do. They're this close to exam day. For them to be relaxed and in their optimal mental headspace on exam day, they completely disengage. They're like, I'm not touching any work the night before. I'm going to be completely refreshed and turn up ready for game day, right? At the end of the day, you need to work out what type of person you are, right? Couple of guidelines for you. If this is your first time sitting the Gamsat and you really don't know what type of person I am, the key thing is do the thing that's going to feel most comfortable to you. If you're sitting there the day before and you're like working yourself into a state because you haven't done any questions, you're just sitting there and your mind's going at a million miles an hour, have a look at a few questions, do an essay plan, see if that calms you down. If you feel like your head's about to burst, if you look at another single question and you're going to be put in a miserable mood, then perhaps disengage and don't do that, right? The key thing is make sure that you've actually doing what works best for you and don't be thrown off by your friend or other people saying, hey, I'm doing this has worked for me in the past, or I'm doing this other thing and that's what works best for me, or I've heard this thing is bad. At the end of the day, that's everybody's opinion. You need to trust yourself, listen to your body and your mind, and work based on what it needs. Now, these next 2 points seem a little bit silly and self-explanatory, but it is important, right? Have everything prepared the night before, and have a game plan about how to get to the venue, right? The last thing you need the morning of your exam is to be running around looking for clothes, trying to work out what time the bus is, realizing there's going to be a train delay, working out that like your mate who was going to take you to the venue actually meant like they had to leave half an hour later. All of these things are, again, unnecessary stresses that are going to be working on you, meaning that you're not going to be able to turn up on exam day with optimal focus and mental clarity, right? Make sure you have those details ironed out. Make sure your ASA ticket is printed out. You've printed out 2 if you need to. Make sure you have your ID documents, your whiteboard ready, your pencils, your whiteboard marker, they all work, have a backup. All of that set and ready to go, right? Third point, a little bit easier said than done, try to get some decent sleep, right? If you know you have an 8 a.m. exam, going to bed at 3 a.m. the night before is not going to be optimal for you. Try and get to bed a little bit earlier if you can, and make sure you have your alarms. Make sure you know somebody to wake you up if necessary. But please, please, please try get enough sleep. This is not just a memory dump exam. You do need to get your brain to work, to be functioning, to be moving smoothly. Lack of sleep is going to hinder that. So Bridget's asked, can you use both the whiteboard and the provided paper, or can you only pick one? The short answer to that, Bridget, is I'm not 100% sure. I would first consult the ASA booklet just to see if they've provided any clarity on it. I'm not actually sure. It might be something that comes down to the individual invigilator, right? Like if you brought a whiteboard, I don't know whether like they'd still provide you with paper necessarily, or they may just be like, look, you've brought a whiteboard, no paper. I can't, the problem is I can't honestly see. I'd say if you're considering bringing a whiteboard, definitely bring the whiteboard and at least you have it there. Otherwise, like you'll still always have the paper option, but I don't know if you kind of have the option to do both at the same time. But definitely ASA booklet. Too easy. What else was I saying? All right, this other point of do what you enjoy is important because, again, like I said, you can choose to engage, disengage, depending on what your thing is, but at the same time, you want to stay relaxed. You want to stay loose, right? Like watch a TV show, watch a movie, do something, go for a walk, whatever puts you in your happy place. Do that, because at this point, the main thing that you're tuning up is your mind. You have the knowledge to go out and perform on game day. Your mind is what you're trying to keep right. Yeah, exactly. And don't worry, at the end of the day, Elizabeth, even if you're the only one who you find is using a whiteboard, that's fine. It all comes back down to that key principle of the correct thing is the thing that's correct for you, not for everybody else. So whatever you're doing, if it works for you, that's the right thing. All right, now we're on D-Day, Gamsat Day. Key thing, right? Another question. Do I do questions the morning off or do I relax? Again, coming back to my old mantra, it's the thing that the correct thing is the thing that works for you. Myself personally, I flick through a few stems on the morning off just to get warmed up, right? So my brain was kind of rolling. The key thing is I made sure that I knew deep, like I made the agreement with myself. It doesn't matter how you do in these stems. You're just doing them so your brain is functioning, right? Sometimes like it doesn't even matter sometimes if you do the questions or not. You can just read some of the text or read things to get your brain functioning. But that was something I decided. Now, again, there are people who are like, absolutely not. I'm going in fresh. First time I'm going to see it is in the exam. Anything else is going to freak me out, which is completely fine. Additionally, if you're the type of person that thinks you're going to be affected by if you do a STEM and you get everything incorrect, or you're going to get things incorrect and you're going to panic and be like, oh my God, I'm stuffed for the exam. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do the same mistakes. My advice is do not do anything before the exam. Just go in and that's when you see it. This is more so if you're somebody like me who gets a bit anxious, or you're somebody that feels like your brain takes a little while to kick in. Warming up, doing a few questions, or just doing some reading of the type of stems you're going to see is a great way to get your brain juices going and feel good before the exam. Now, this second point, this is not the time to change it up. This seems, again, like a very straightforward point, but I've seen students make this mistake, right? If you are the type of person that has a particular morning routine or a particular like thing you do, so like let's say you're somebody that drinks your coffee every morning before you leave, today is not the day to decide to try skip that or go without coffee, right? Vice versa. If you're somebody that's never had coffee in their life, the morning of the exam is not the day to try and drink coffee for the first time and roll the dice and see how that goes, right? I know people that have done that before and it has not ended well for them. The key thing is stay in your zone, stay focused, do what makes you feel comfortable. Getting there in time, very important. You're going to have the time that they give you on your exam ticket. Try to aim to be there half an hour before at least, just so you know, like, just so you're safe and you kind of account for anything that could happen. This idea of being aware of the postprandial nap, right? We all know section 1 continues with section 2, and then you get that you get the 1 hour break and you get section 3. This is very important to refuel during that time, eat some food, get some energy. This is not the time though to have an absolute feast between section 2 and 3, right? Because you will fill up, and trust me, 1 hour into section 3, you will just crash like this as you feel hella sleepy, hella dozy, and it's not going to work, right? So make sure you do refuel, make sure you eat, but this is not the time to have like a massive meal that's going to put you into a food coma. Now, other points as well, when you get there, when you're hanging around at lunch, Don't feel like you necessarily need to hang out and talk with people. In fact, I'd advise rather cynically, be careful of doing that. People love to be like, what did you get for this score? What did you get for this question? What about this thing, right? And if you're anything like me, that freaks you the hell out and just makes you feel worse. So don't feel bad for just like kind of going into your own corner, doing your own thing and kind of disengaging with everything, right? This point about the bathroom being your friend, right? It sounds a little bit weird. This is more a generic nod to there's no correct way to do these, to do section 1, 2, or 3, right? It's about maintaining your focus. Now, if you find your focus slipping, you're getting tired, if you find yourself working up, if you find yourself going into a spiral, the number one thing I can tell you is take a short break, right? Whether that's just looking up at the ceiling, closing your eyes, just looking away from your screen, or taking a short trip to the bathroom, right? It feels like in such a high pressured exam that you don't have the time to do any of these things. But at the end of the day, trust me, taking the 30 seconds to like a couple of minutes to just look up at the ceiling or go to the bathroom so you can splash some water on your face, or you walk around, get the blood flowing, and you sort of recenter yourself and you disengage from that spiral or from the tiredness, is a much better investment of your time and in your potential mark than it is to try and grit it out and just push through your tiredness or your anxiety or just continue that spiral, right? So don't be afraid to take the time to remove yourself from that stress and then come back to it fresh. And that's really the idea with the mindset as well, right? You want to maintain a positive mindset going through this thing. That's your most powerful weapon. Now, a couple of key takeaways to kind of leave you guys with, right? This idea that the Gamsat is important, but it's part of the journey, not the destination, right? What I mean by that is the Gamsat is a very important exam, right? It's kind of an exam that depends on you getting into a medical school or a dental school. I'm not taking that away at all. But in the grander scheme of things, what you'll realize is after the Gamsat, there's your medical school exams, there's your junior doctor exams, fellowship exams, training program exams, all of these, right? The Gamsat is one of those milestones that exists along that path. Now, as you go along that path, you are not necessarily going to get it correct the first time, every time, right? And that's not to say take a defeatist attitude. You should be gunning and aiming it to get it every time you do something. But the idea is sometimes it may not work that time and you have to come back and do it again, right? And the reason I'm mentioning that is because that's the frame of mind I want you guys to have, right? The more stressed, the more wound up, the more anxious you get, the more your potential mark is likely to suffer in this exam, right? The mindset that you want is I'm absolutely going to crush this exam, going to put it in the ground, but at the same time, my life does not depend on this exam, right? If for whatever reason this exam doesn't go well, my life's not going to end. The world is not going to stop spinning. I'm just going to come back, right? At the end of the day, if you've decided, hey, med's my goal, dent's my goal, and you're moving on towards, you're working towards that purpose, you are going to get there. It just takes different people shorter and longer times. I took 2 times. I know there are people that sit it once and do it. I know people that sit it a lot more, like 5, 6 times, right? It changes. But once you've made up your mind to do something, know that that's what you're working towards. And it's not any one incident that's going to change whether you get there or not. The second thing, as I said, the best strategy is the one that works for you, right? Don't be thrown off by what your friend is trying, the person next to you is trying, what different people are saying work for them, or what different people's opinions of different strategies are. At the end of the day, the thing that nets you the most marks, that makes you feel the most comfortable and is going to give you the best bang for your buck, is the thing that's going to help you. And then the last 2 things, backing yourself and doing the best that you can, right? I've got a quote after this that I want you all to take some time to read about backing yourself and believing in yourself. But the key thing is when you're in that exam room, you are your competition, right? Forget about everybody else and what they're trying to do. You need to be in there sitting and thinking about this exam and approaching it, trying to do the best that you can. Don't worry about what everybody else is going to do and how it's going to affect you or anything like that. You're in there to get the best mark that you're capable of getting. Now, in terms of backing yourself, this is a quote that I discovered on my Gamsat sitting. And I'll just leave this there because I do want you all to take a minute or two to read this. All right. Hopefully you've had a bit of a chance to read that. Now, this is actually a quote I found around the time I was sitting the Gamsat, and it was very meaningful to me because I think it spoke to a very common experience a lot of us have, which is fear, but the importance of not conflating that with, as it says, doubt, right? At the end of the day, it's a difficult exam. It's tough. It's going to test you. But you guys have been working towards this, right? You need to trust and back yourselves that you do have the skills and what it takes to overcome this exam and get to the next stage, right? Whether that's this time, whether that's the time after that, you need to trust and know that you have the ability to do that. It's okay to be scared, right? That is a natural response. This is a scary exam and that should be respected. But the one thing you're not allowed to do is doubt that you have the ability to get onto the next stage, right? Every one of you who's sitting this exam, who's practiced, who's worked, has the ability to smash it and get to the next stage of this journey. And none of you should doubt your ability to do that, right? One thing I always tell people is when you're in that exam room, when you're in the exam hall, let's say section 1, you have 100 minutes to do section 1, right? Now that 100 minutes is going to go by whether you spend it completely in the bathroom, taking a nap, answering questions, doesn't matter. You have no control over that 100 minutes. The only thing you have control over in those 100 minutes is what you choose to do with your time. So even if you're feeling down, even if you think it's hopeless, one question at a time, one step at a time, trust yourself and move forward. Thanks, Jennifer. But that is the key thing, right? It's okay to be scared, but none of you have permission to doubt yourselves. You guys are all capable of smashing this out. So with that said, I will leave it open to a Q&A. I hope what I've said has helped. If there's any questions based on what I've said or anything else you're not sure about, please drop it in the chat and I'd be more than happy to answer. Otherwise, also, like, there isn't really anything after this. So if you want to leave now, more than welcome to as well. All right, so what do you recommend doing in the S1 and S3 reading times? At the end of the day, so the key thing to remember is with the reading times now, you can start working during them. You don't have to, I think double check this with the Ace booklet, but I'm pretty sure like you can start working through the reading times. You don't need to like wait till reading time is finished to start. But for me personally, I still think it's worth, sweet, you can start straight away. Yep. I personally at least would still take a minute or two to quickly flip through the paper and just see what the distribution of questions is, right? Like just so, for example, in section 1, like if you have a quick flick through and seeing, okay, there's a whole bunch of technical text like smack in the middle, right? So I'm going to slow down in the middle, or I know there's some easier questions on the other side of this, just so you have a rough idea of the distribution of questions. And definitely, I think doing that for a weaker section, if you're somebody that's very confident in a particular section, you don't necessarily need to do that. So for myself, at least for section 1, I was very happy with how I was going to go. The moment question time started, I just launched into it. I didn't bother doing that. But for section 3, I definitely had a quick flip through to see how it would go. I'll answer, can you do task B before task A in section 2? I believe you can. Just make sure you save your response for task B before jumping back to task A. Section 2, idea development when it's hard. If it's an obtuse idea, the key thing is to fall back on fundamentals, right? Ask yourself, what do I think about this idea? What do other people think about this idea? Where's their disagreement about this? Why is there a disagreement about this? And then speak to that. All right. Any other questions? Yep, I think it's fine to use similar examples in both essay tasks. However, the key thing is you need to make sure that even if you use, let's say, the same example in both essay tasks, that your essay is actually speaking to that topic, right? So let's say you have a way you analyze, and let's say you use the George Floyd example as a question of structural inequality or something like that, and there's a particular way you analyze that, right? You can't have a copy and paste analysis in both essays, right? That's going to look really bad. You need to make sure that whatever your example is, that's targeting that particular theme, and you've spoken about it with relation to that particular theme and why it's relevant to that particular theme. How to calm yourself down on the day when you feel panicked before the test starts, when you're waiting in the line, for example. It's a tricky one. I think genuinely taking, it sounds a bit silly, but kind of take some deep breaths, right? Have a look at square breathing. I think it's like breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4, hold 1, 2, 3, 4, let it out 1, 2, 3, 4, and then just wait 1, 2, 3, 4 before repeating is definitely something that people say helps them calm down a little bit as well. I think, again, that idea of it's okay to feel nervous, right? You know this is going to be a hard test. You know it's going to be scared. But I think you need to combat that feeling of panic that by going, hey, it doesn't matter what I'm going to get here. I know I have the skills to deal with it, right? Know that you're prepared to deal with whatever happens. So nobody knows what's going to happen, right? At the end of the day, but know that you're ready and you have the skills to deal with that, and tell that to yourself when you're feeling panic, right? It's okay to be scared, but I'm not going to panic because I know I can do this. I know I have the skill set to do this. And I think also sometimes play to your strengths, right? Let's say in section 1, you really struggle with cartoons. And the first question is a cartoon. Don't feel like you need to do that first question. If you know you're great at poems, hunt down a poem, do the poem, build your confidence back up, right? Don't feel like there's a rule to how you have to do it. Do what works for you. When given a list of prompts or quotes for the essays, do you have to use them all, or are you meant to base your essay off one? You don't have to use them all. You can use one if you want. At the end of the day, the quotes are going to speak to a particular theme and a particular viewpoint on the theme. That's the thing that you're addressing in your essays. If you get a high mark on overall Gamsat, but score particularly low in one section, does it affect your admission into med school? Not necessarily. The only exception is, I think, and you need to double check what these are, there is a minimum score requirement in every section, right? So you have to get a minimum score last time I checked, don't quote me on this, I think it was across 15 every section, right? So let's say you get a 98, let's say you get like a 98 in section 3, 80 in section 2, and you get a 51 in section 1. Beautiful, great, you're fine. But if you get like a 40 something in section 1 that's below that minimum threshold, then I think you're going to be having some problems. Yep, Jessica said that you have a minimum score 50. Awesome. Yep, look, it definitely is a mind game, but that's the importance of kind of making sure that your mind is kind of relaxed and in a good headspace. Sorry, as well. So in terms of cutting out, at the end of the day, you don't have to use all the prompts. The prompts are basically going to refer to all center around a theme or a particular view on the theme. And that's the thing that you need to address. It doesn't have to be using all the prompts necessarily. You can if you want to, though. Yeah, awesome. No worries, Jess. Happy to help. Oh, yep, sure. That's a good idea. I will drop my email. Yep, so email Maninda at frasersmedical.com.au. It's in the chat if you want to copy and paste it. Please definitely reach out via email if you have any questions or you're kind of feeling very nervy or anxious. Happy to have a quick chat. And yeah, any other questions? Otherwise, you guys are happy to leave whenever there isn't really any other kind of formal content. So I'll hang around a bit more in case people have questions to answer. But yeah, more than welcome to get back to your Saturday night.
Hi, Maninda. Can you see my question?
I don't think it came up. So if you just want to ask it
Yeah,
out
sure.
loud, yeah.
I
no
tried
worries.
twice and I thought,
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just wondering, in terms of going between task A and B, can you do that? Or do you have to complete one and then you can't go back to the other?
I think you can. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm fairly certain you can jump between task A and B.
Yeah.
You just really need to make sure like you've saved your stuff before you go to the next jump to the other task.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Sure. Interesting question. When would you recommend prepping for interviews after Gamsat results are released, when we've actually received the offer? I think definitely earlier rather than later, right? When you receive the offer, I'd actually say that's probably a little bit too late. Definitely after results are released would be, if you haven't already started, I'd be starting to kind of lightly prep from that time, right? I don't think the moment moment you've set the Gamsat, please don't immediately start like prepping for the interview. Give yourself some time to disconnect, to relax, right? Give it a month and a half maybe before you want to start looking. And when I say prepping for interviews, right, you don't need to be intensely prepping for interviews, right? Just pick a particular area, have a look at the phrases interview guide. We have a lot of great free stuff there as well, or feel free to email me. I can give you some pointers. But basically, like, pick an area like ethics or rural medicine or something, and just do some general reading around that, right? Like, just read some news articles. That can be your prep. When the results start coming out, that's when your Gamsat results start coming out. That's when I would start being a bit more purposeful and a bit more intensive in my prep, starting to focus on actual questions and actual areas. And then by the time you're receiving an offer, you really want to have like a clear interview study routine and plan in place. So if you do not receive the Gamsat mark that you want, still, I think definitely reach out to, whether it's somebody from Frasers, reach out to myself. I think depending on what the mark is within reason and what your GPA is, it's always worth sometimes still applying via Gamsat. You never know what could happen. You still could get a particular offer. If it's a case of, look, this is not going to work this time, I think that is what it is, right? Like that's the thing. But like I said, this is, you need to look at this longitudinally, not as a binary, I didn't get in, I failed, that's the end of the road, right? It's more so, I didn't get in this time, what went wrong, what do I need to analyze, what do I need to work on, right? But I think the most important thing is, look, it's a friggin' heartbreaking thing, like when you poured your blood, sweat, and tears into this and it doesn't go the way that you want. The most important thing, I think, in that point is talk to somebody, right? Whether that's your parents, a friend, myself, somebody else you know from Frasers. Have a chat to them. I think get those feelings out, right? And take a little bit of time away from it, right? If you don't get the mark that you don't want, that's fine. Don't immediately jump up the next day and be like, all right, time to go back to study, right? You have plenty of time to do that. You do need to take a little bit of time away to decompress, process your emotions, have a little bit of a rest, and then hop back on the horse. Oh, okay. Do I think scores being valid for 4 years will affect this year's intake? Are you more competitive? Would you need more than 70? The reason I had that reaction is, the honest answer is I am not sure. I'm not the person to ask about this. I do know Scott Fraser, maybe a couple of months back, a couple of weeks back, when they made the first announcement, definitely jumped on and had a conversation about this. So I try and hunt and have a look on the Frasers community site if that webinar is up, because I think they went through it in a lot more detail in terms of the potential things. So I don't want to make a comment because it would basically be a complete shot in the dark if I was guessing. I think my 2 cents on this issue, though, and kind of related issues, right, is I think, and I'm no exception, I got caught up in it as well, right? We kind of want to know all the details. We want to know all the moving pieces and all the bits. I think sometimes it's an illusion, thinking that if we know it or we kind of control it, we'll be in a better position. But at the end of the day, none of these extraneous details matter, right? You have one job and one job only, which is to go in there and get the best mark that you can. That is the only thing that you can control, and the rest is out of your hands. So because of that, I think it's easier said than done, but that is the only thing you need to focus on. Everything else becomes a distraction, which has the capacity to take away from your ability to achieve that goal. Matt asked if we wanted to jot down some reflection notes after the test, what sort of things should we reflect on to potentially help future settings? In terms of jotting down things after the test, I think anything you found particularly difficult in the test, like, oh man, section 1, there were quite a few comments. I was absolutely crap at them. I don't know. I need to do something about this, right? So you can look at it from a skills-based point of view. X came up. I did not know how to deal with X. I need to work on X, right? Another way of looking at it, and or looking at it, not one or the other, is ask yourself, how did I feel throughout the exam, right? Like, were there any points that I spiraled during the exam? What was the thing that triggered those spirals? Was there any points I felt particularly good and strategies that also worked for me? I did this. I felt really good in this section because of that. What, noting those things down as well that help. And that's where I think definitely having a chat to somebody as well to talk it out and reflect on your experience of the exam can definitely help as well. 10 days, you got this. Nearly there. Yeah, it is a bit close before. It's one of those times I think like this is like when you're like, I wish I had more time, but at the same time, I wish this was tomorrow and I could just get it done with. Oh, good question. Did studying for the Gamsat and the process of content become useful in med? So I don't think the content per se is necessarily relevant in med, but the process of studying, definitely useful, right? I think two things which I took away from the studying process in Gamsat. One is studying for the Gamsat properly. First time I said it, I was not, if I'm being honest with myself, studying properly. That process of continuously, day in, day out, working a little bit on something, putting in work regularly, studying regularly, is something that was incredibly useful to me in med, because that is ultimately what you need to be doing in med, is working on little things every day by day, consistently. Not right. It's not about the giant kind of crams. They're occasionally here and there, but it's so about you being able to consistently put in work over an extended period of time. And I think studying for Gamsat is something that teaches you to do that extremely well. The second is without, like I said, not the content so much, but the thought processes I developed in problem solving, whether that's section 1 or section 3, or the way of presenting an argument or a stream of ideas, I think are extremely useful as well when it comes in medicine, whether it's eliciting a patient history or presenting your patient history to somebody, or the way you think through a clinical problem. Those I think were also developed, developed quite nicely for me through kind of my Gamsat study, for sure. All right, guys. So look, if there's no more other questions, I'll drop my email address down one more time as well. Please feel free to reach out via that as well if you have any questions, just want to have a chat. But look, thank you again for turning up. I know it's not everybody's favorite thing to do on a Saturday night, but hopefully this was helpful to you. And I wish you guys all the best in your exam. You're nearly there. You guys got this. No worries at all. Happy to help. All right, guys. Take care. All the best. Thank you.